Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah,
I think today's is going to be really fascinating.
I think so too.
We're diving into the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.
Right.
Now, I know what you might be thinking, another MLK special, but this one's different, I promise.
Okay.
We're going way beyond the I Have a Dream speech,
Okay.
and we're focusing on a period that's often overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
It's the aftermath of his assassination in 1968.
Yeah, that's right.
1968.
A truly volatile time in American history.
Really volatile.
The Vietnam War was raging.
Mm.
The civil rights movement was facing intense challenges.
Yeah.
And the nation was deeply divided.
So set the stage for us a little bit, okay?
Yeah.
It's 1968, tensions are already running high,
Yeah.
and then suddenly this pivotal leader is taken away.
Right.
How did the country react? How did the fight for equality continue without King at the helm?
Well, the immediate reaction was really a mix of profound grief and explosive anger.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Over 100 cities erupted in what became known as the King assassination riots.
Riots. Wow.
Yeah.
I knew there was unrest, but I didn't realize it was on that scale.
The scale of the violence was staggering.
Really?
It's estimated about $100 million in property damage,
Wow.
which is over $1 billion in today's money.
Gosh.
Yeah, and this reaction really underscores the raw emotions and the deep-seated racial tensions that still simmered beneath the surface, even with the progress that the civil rights movement had made.
Makes you wonder if things were as far along as we're often taught.
Right.
Would the reaction have been so volatile?
It's a crucial question to consider.
It is.
Now, amidst this chaos and unrest, the government had to respond.
Right. So what did they do? I imagine there was a lot of pressure to act decisively.
Well, President Lyndon B. Johnson declared a national day of mourning
Okay.
as a symbolic gesture of respect for King.
Yeah.
But he knew that actions speak louder than words. He urged Congress to pass legislation that would directly address the issues of racial inequality
Okay.
that King had dedicated his life to fighting.
So is that what led to the Fair Housing Act?
That's right.
Okay.
The Fair Housing Act, officially known as the Civil Rights Act of 1968,
Okay.
was a landmark piece of legislation that aimed to eliminate discrimination in housing. It outlawed practices like refusing to sell or rent to someone based on their race, religion, national origin,
Okay.
or later gender.
Okay.
A huge step towards equality, at least on paper.
On paper, you're making it sound like it wasn't as effective as it was intended to be.
Well, while the act's intentions were noble,
Yeah.
its impact was unfortunately a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
There were significant challenges with enforcement,
Okay.
and discrimination in housing persisted, often in more subtle and insidious ways.
That's disappointing, but not altogether surprising.
Yeah.
So we have this immediate visceral reaction to King's death, followed by this monumental piece of legislation that sadly fell short of its goals. But what about King himself? How was his legacy viewed in the years following his assassination?
Now that's where things get really fascinating.
Okay.
We have sources from several historians that offer contrasting perspectives on King's impact.
I see.
Some argue that his assassination led to a sort of sanitized legacy.
A sanitized legacy?
Yes.
What do you mean by that? It sounds like there's a lot to unpack there.
Essentially, it suggests that King's image was often simplified and idealized after his death, with some of his more radical views being downplayed
Okay.
or even erased from popular memory.
Wow.
For example, one historian we read, David Garrow,
Okay.
focuses on the traditional view of King as a heroic figure who achieved monumental victories
Okay.
through his commitment to nonviolence.
So that's the sanitized version.
Right.
The one that emphasizes King's achievements while glossing over some of the more challenging aspects of his work.
Yeah.
But you said there were other perspectives.
Yes. Another historian, Howard Zinn,
Okay.
argues that King was actually much more radical, especially in his later years.
Interesting.
Zinn emphasizes King's strong opposition to the Vietnam War
Okay.
and his vocal advocacy for economic justice.
So we have this contrast between King, the iconic peacemaker,
Yeah.
and King, the radical activist who challenged systems of power.
Right.
It makes you wonder, why is this other side of King less widely known?
That's a question worth considering, isn't it?
It is.
It seems there's a lot more to King's legacy than we might initially realize.
Absolutely. This deep dive is already giving me a much more nuanced understanding of who King was and what he stood for.
Okay.
And there's so much more to explore.
Right.
We're just getting started. Welcome back. I'm really enjoying this deep dive.
Me too.
It's thought-provoking.
It is fascinating to uncover these layers to his story, and we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
Remember we were discussing the different schools of thought on King's impact.
Right. We talked about the traditional view of King as a hero who achieved significant legislative victories.
Yes.
And the perspective that he was actually much more radical.
Yeah.
Especially in his stance against the Vietnam War and his advocacy for economic justice.
Well,
but you mentioned there were two more schools of thought.
absolutely.
So what are those?
The third perspective we have comes from historians who focus on the Black Power movement.
Okay.
They argue that King's assassination actually intensified the divide between those who believed in nonviolent protest and those who felt a more assertive approach was necessary.
That makes sense. King's death must have been a devastating blow to the movement.
Yeah.
I can see how some people might have questioned whether peaceful methods could truly bring about change, especially in the face of such violence.
Exactly. Figures like Stokely Carmichael, who were already advocating for Black Power,
Okay.
saw King's assassination as proof that a more militant approach was needed. This perspective acknowledges King's achievements with nonviolence, but highlights a turning point.
Right.
Some within the movement felt a different path was necessary after his death.
So it's almost a bittersweet legacy.
Yeah.
Progress was made, but at a tragic cost, and it led to a shift towards more confrontational strategies.
Right.
So what about the fourth perspective?
The fourth perspective, championed by social historians like Claiborne Carson,
Okay.
who actually edited King's papers,
Wow.
emphasizes the grassroots, community-level impact of King's work and death.
So it's not just about King the individual, but about the countless people he inspired to carry on the fight in their own communities.
Precisely. Carson argues that while King was undoubtedly an inspirational figure, the success of his work depended heavily on everyday activists and local organizations that continued to push for change on the ground even after his death.
So a more nuanced view of King's influence, it wasn't just him single-handedly leading the charge, but a collective effort fueled by his vision.
It's a reminder that movements for social change are built from the bottom up, with individuals and communities working tirelessly to create a better world.
Okay, so 4 distinct perspectives on King's legacy.
Right.
It's clear that there's no simple answer to the question of how he's remembered.
Absolutely. King's legacy is complex and multifaceted.
Yeah.
It's about celebrating his achievements, acknowledging the challenges he faced,
Of course.
and recognizing the ongoing struggle for justice that continues today.
Well said. Can we circle back to that sanitized legacy we talked about earlier?
Sure.
How did this simplified, almost idealized version of King come to be so dominant?
It's a fascinating question. In the years after his death, King's image was often used in ways that emphasized unity and harmony, while downplaying his more radical critiques of American society.
So focusing on the I Have a Dream speech, but not so much on his speeches denouncing the Vietnam War or poverty.
Right, it's like presenting a selective version of history.
Yeah, it is. And is this sanitized version of King what we typically see in textbooks or popular culture?
Often, yes.
Yeah.
It's the version that's easiest to digest.
Right.
The one that fits neatly into a narrative of American exceptionalism and progress. But it's a version that misses out on the depth and complexity of King's thought and activism.
It doesn't paint the full picture.
Exactly.
So it's on us as informed citizens to dig deeper, to go beyond the simplified narratives and engage with the full scope of King's legacy.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And that includes understanding his imperfections and struggles.
Yeah.
King wasn't a perfect saint, and acknowledging that makes his achievements all the more remarkable.
Good point.
Yeah.
It makes him more relatable, more human.
Right.
Now, can we shift gears for a moment and talk about the Fair Housing Act again?
Sure.
We touched on its limitations earlier, but I'm curious to dive deeper into those challenges.
Okay.
I'm sure it wasn't a simple case of good intentions gone wrong.
No.
There must be more to the story.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Remember, the Fair Housing Act aimed to eliminate discrimination in housing based on race, religion, national origin, and later gender.
Right. A legal remedy for a deeply ingrained social problem.
Yes. On paper, it seemed like a powerful tool for creating more equitable communities.
What went wrong? Why wasn't it more effective?
Well, one major issue was the lack of proactive enforcement.
Okay.
The burden of proving discrimination often fell on the victims,
I see.
who had to navigate a complex legal system with limited resources.
So even if you knew you were being discriminated against, it was difficult to actually get justice.
Exactly. And even when cases were brought to court,
Yeah.
proving discriminatory intent was often extremely difficult.
Really?
Landlords and real estate agents could find subtle ways to discriminate
Wow.
without leaving a clear paper trail.
So the law was there, but it wasn't always effective in changing people's behavior or practices.
Yeah.
It's like having a speed limit, but no one to enforce it.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to the point we made earlier about the Fair Housing Act's mixed legacy.
Mm-hmm.
It was a significant step forward,
Yeah.
but it didn't fully achieve its goals.
Right.
It didn't address the root causes of the problem.
And how does this connect back to King's vision?
Right.
I know he wasn't just fighting for legal equality,
No.
but for social and economic justice as well.
Exactly. King understood that laws alone couldn't dismantle the systems of oppression that kept minorities marginalized.
Yeah.
He knew that true equality required addressing the underlying issues of poverty, lack of opportunity, and systemic racism.
So for King, the Fair Housing Act would have been seen as a necessary but insufficient step towards creating a truly just society.
Exactly.
It was a start, but there was and still is a lot more work to be done.
A lot more work to be done. And that leads us to an important question.
Okay.
What are the challenges that still remain in the fight for housing equality today?
That's a great question. We've explored the complexities of King's legacy, the challenges of the Fair Housing Act, and the ongoing fight for equality.
Right.
But before we wrap up this section, let's bring it back to our listener.
Okay.
Why should they care about all of this?
Right.
What's the relevance of King's work for their lives today?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
I think there are several key takeaways here.
Okay, what are they?
First, King's legacy reminds us that the fight for justice is a marathon, not a sprint.
Okay.
There will be setbacks, challenges, and moments of despair, but we must never give up
Wow.
on the pursuit of a more equitable world.
So perseverance in the face of adversity.
Yes. What else?
Hello.
Second King's life teaches us the importance of speaking truth to power,
Okay.
even when it's uncomfortable or unpopular.
Hmm.
He challenged the status quo, even when it put him at risk,
Right.
because he believes in a higher moral purpose.
So courage and conviction in our own beliefs.
Yes. And what's the third takeaway?
Yeah, what is it?
Finally, King's vision reminds us that social change requires collective action. It's not about waiting for a single charismatic leader to solve all our problems.
Right.
It's about each of us doing our part, however small, to create a more just and compassionate world.
It's a great point. We all have a role to play in building the kind of society that King dreamed of. We can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix things. We have to be active participants in the fight for justice.
Absolutely. And his legacy continues to inspire and challenge us to be better,
Yeah,
to do better,
of course.
and to never settle for anything less than true equality and justice.
Wow, that's a powerful way to put it.
Right?
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We started with riots in 1968.
Right.
And now we're talking about the ongoing fight for affordable housing in 2024.
Yeah,
It's clear that King's work is far from over.
indeed. But his legacy continues to inspire and guide us.
Yeah.
His vision of a just and equitable society remains a powerful beacon for those working to create a better world.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. We've been exploring the complexities of his life and work and, the fight for equality that's still going on today.
Still so relevant.
Before we wrap up, I want to dive a little deeper into the lasting impact of the Fair Housing Act.
Okay.
It's been over 50 years since it was passed.
It has.
What's changed, what hasn't, and where do things stand today?
Well, it's important to acknowledge that the Fair Housing Act did have a significant impact on the landscape of American housing.
Okay.
It helped to reduce overt discrimination,
Okay.
and it opened up opportunities for minorities to live in neighborhoods that were previously off limits.
So progress was made, but I have a feeling it wasn't a complete fix.
Right.
We talked about the Act's limitations earlier.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. The Act faced challenges with enforcement,
Yeah.
and persistent forms of discrimination continued, often in more subtle and insidious ways. But despite those limitations, it laid the groundwork for further progress
Yeah.
and helped shift the conversation around housing equality.
Okay, so it was a step in the right direction, even if it didn't solve everything.
Exactly.
What are some of the specific ways that the Fair Housing Act has shaped housing patterns and opportunities over the past 5 decades?
One key impact has been the increased diversity of many neighborhoods.
Okay.
While segregation still exists,
Yeah.
the act made it more difficult for landlords and real estate agents to blatantly discriminate
Okay.
based on race or origin.
So we're seeing more integrated communities as a result of the act.
Right.
That sounds like a positive development,
Mm-hmm.
but does integration automatically translate to equality?
That's a great question, and that's the crucial question.
Yeah.
Integration doesn't automatically equal equality. There are still significant disparities in terms of access to resources,
Yeah.
quality of housing, and economic opportunities in different neighborhoods.
Right. It's not just about who lives where.
Yeah,
It's about the quality of life and opportunities available in those communities.
absolutely.
It's about ensuring that everyone has a fair chance to thrive.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And that's where the legacy of the Fair Housing Act gets a bit more complicated.
Okay.
While it helped to open doors,
Yeah.
it didn't fully address the underlying economic and social inequalities that contribute to housing disparities.
So we're still dealing with the systemic issues that King was fighting against,
Exactly.
issues that go beyond just housing.
Absolutely. Issues like poverty, lack of access to affordable housing,
Okay.
and discriminatory lending practices
Right.
continue to create barriers
Yeah.
for many people,
Uh-huh.
particularly those in minority communities.
And how does this connect back to King's vision?
Right.
We've talked about his commitment to economic justice.
Well, remember, King was a fierce advocate for economic justice.
Yeah.
He believed that everyone deserved a decent place to live, regardless of their race or income.
Right.
The Fair Housing Act was a step towards that goal.
Okay.
But it's clear that there's still much work to be done.
Yeah.
You can't just pass a law and expect the problem to magically disappear.
Of course not.
It takes ongoing effort and a commitment to addressing the root causes of inequality.
So what are some of the challenges that remain in the fight for housing equality today?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is the shortage of affordable housing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In many cities, rents are skyrocketing,
Right.
and low-income families are being priced out of their neighborhoods.
Right.
This often leads to displacement
Yeah.
and further marginalization of already vulnerable communities.
And I imagine that disproportionately affects minority communities.
Absolutely.
They're often the ones who are most vulnerable to these kinds of economic pressures.
Right. The legacy of redlining, discriminatory lending practices,
Yeah.
and other forms of systemic racism
Yeah.
continue to have a devastating impact on communities of color.
It's like a cycle of disadvantage that's hard to break free from.
It is.
So even though outright discrimination might be less common,
Yeah.
these historical injustices are still shaping housing patterns and opportunities today.
Right.
It's a reminder that the past isn't really past.
It's still very much present in our current reality.
That's a powerful insight. And that's why it's so important to understand the connection between housing and broader issues of social and economic equality. We can't address one without addressing the others.
It's not just about bricks and mortar.
Huh.
It's about creating communities where everyone has the chance to thrive.
Right.
It's about investing in education, job creation, and social programs that empower people to break the cycle of poverty and inequality.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about creating a society where everyone has a fair shot at a good life.
Yeah.
And that's a vision that I think aligns perfectly with King's dream.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
And we have.
We started with riots in 1968, and now we're talking about the ongoing fight for affordable housing in 2024.
Right.
It's clear that King's work is far from over,
Yeah.
but his legacy continues to inspire and guide us as we continue the struggle for justice and equality. Indeed, his vision of a just and equitable society remains a powerful beacon for those working to create a better world.
Yeah.
A world where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential,
Absolutely.
regardless of their background or circumstances.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy, what's one key takeaway you hope our listener walks away with?
I think the most important lesson is that the pursuit of justice is a continuous journey.
Okay.
It requires vigilance, courage, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. King's life and work teach us that progress is possible, but it's not inevitable.
Right.
It requires constant effort, collaboration, and a commitment to building a better future for all.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And I think it's fitting that we end this deep dive on a note of hope and action.
Yeah.
King's dream of a just and equitable society may not be fully realized yet, But his legacy empowers us to keep striving, keep pushing, and keep believing in the power of collective action
Absolutely.
to create positive change. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you learned something new,
Yes.
gained a deeper understanding of his impact, and felt inspired to carry his message of hope and justice forward.
That's right.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better world.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.